And it's an evening of Hazkara for Hagon Rav Dovid Feinstein, and also for Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. There were two giants in their own ways, and each one represented something different. One was a son of the Gadol Ador of Moshe Feinstein, and was a Gadol in America. One started his own Mesorah, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs became a light and a voice for Judaism around the world, crossed all segments of society. The Gemara in Moed Katan tells us that Misas Tzadikim is mechaperes. When a tzaddik is nifter, it's a kapara for all of Am Yisrael. And the Gemara learns it out from the smichus, the juxtaposition of the death of Miriam to Para Aduma. The Mefarshim ask, why is it learned out specifically from Para Aduma? Many korbanos are mechaper, but the Mefarshim explain that Para Aduma is mechaper for something very specific. Para Aduma is just not a regular kapara like a korban is, but it's mechaper, as the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph says, that every tragedy that Am Yisrael has really has in it a little bit of the sin of Chet HaEgel. And we know that any tzara that comes to Am Yisrael is coming to be mechaper Chet HaEgel. So therefore, the Misa of Tzadikim is learnt out from the Para Aduma, the passing of Miriam next to the Para Aduma, that it is mechaper. It's not just mechaper on our personal sins, it's mechaper on the national situation that we're in. And we know that Am Yisrael is in a national tragedy. The world is going through a difficult time. And we hope that this will be a true kapara, a kapara for Am Yisrael, a kapara for the world, because it is such a great loss for us. Many of our members grew up in England, grew up as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs as the chief rabbi of England. Some of us grew up in New York, and where Rabbi Dovid Feinstein was the head of the Moetzas Gedolei HaTorah in a posek. And it's a personal loss for many of us, but it's also a national loss for all of Am Yisrael. And that's what it means that Misa of Tzadikim is mechaper. In the Pirkei de Reb Lezer, it's mashma that it's mechaper. Not only their passing is mechaper, but it's mechaper because Am Yisrael has a hesped. Because we have a moment of stopping in a hesped and commemoration, that in itself is mechaper. And that's really what tonight is all about, is to stop and to hear from our Mara de Asra, from our Rav Berelwein, words of chizuk and inspiration about these two great giants, and then to hear from Rabbi Alan Kimchi, who was a big Rav in England for many, many years, about his relationship with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. So without further ado, I would like to give over the microphone to Rabbi Berelwein.
Good evening, everyone. Dovid Feinstein and Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Sachs were two different people completely. And to a certain extent, they spoke to two different audiences. Rabbi Sachs was a universal personality. He could hold debates with atheists and agnostics, with professors, with Oxford dons. And Dovid Feinstein was a great Talmud Chacham who was very low-key, who was pretty much restricted, so to speak, on the surface at least, to the circle that he operated in, the Yeshiva Mesivta Tiferes Yerushalayim on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and to the rabbis of the United States who called him for decisions in halacha and general guidance. But the truth of the matter is, as I see it, they were parts of the same machine, so to speak. Lahagdil Torah, La'adira. They both cared for the Jewish people. They both cared for Torah. They both sacrificed themselves for it. they both were able, in their own spheres, to influence thousands and many thousands, perhaps even millions of people. Rabbi Kimchi, who knew Rabbi Sachs very well, will undoubtedly speak a great deal about him. I knew him also, but certainly not to the extent that Rabbi Kimchi did. But Rabbi Sachs was a necessary person for the Jewish people. Lifnei Malachim, he could speak to kings. He spoke in the highest places of secular society. And whenever he spoke Torah. That's a great, great achievement. What is probably not known about Rav Dovid Feinstein is that, in my opinion, that we would not have Art Scroll today. We would not have the Shas, the Talmud in English, and all of the other achievements that this enormous organization has created. To a great extent, Art Scroll is the Rabbi from Klal Yisrael, who has not benefited from its Chumash, its Siddur, its Machzor, its Talmud, all of the commentaries that it has published. It's made the Torah accessible. But when it began, as all good ventures face, it had a lot of critics. I remember the beginning. And there were a lot of so-called heavyweights in the Jewish world that opposed them. They said it was unnecessary. They said it would somehow detract from the learning in the yeshivot, and that it could prove negative and not positive. And Reb Dovid Feinstein was the one that stiffened their back. He gave them their backing publicly and privately. And we owe him a great deal of gratitude for that alone. He was a very simple person. You know, he didn't dress like Rosh Yeshiva. He was once asked why he doesn't wear a rabbinic frock and the big hat. And he said, that's reserved for a gadol, for a great man. I'm not a gadol. He said, my father could wear it, but I can't. You would see him Fridays in the store on the Lower East Side buying for Shabbos like an ordinary person, because he felt that way. And he stabilized the entire neighborhood. The neighborhood had deteriorated terribly. And Jews left it. It became Oriental, then it became all sorts of different ethnic groups. But he maintained the Jewish core there. As long as Mesivta Tiferes Yerushalayim was there, so then Jews could live there, and it's had a rejuvenation in our time. And it's all because of a simple person who had such greatness within him that he did not have to exhibit it publicly. He did not in any way pursue honor or recognition. I met with him quite a number of times. I called him quite a number of times. I listened to what he had to say in halachic matters. He was an ish yashar, a straight man. He was not influenced by what others would say. He was not influenced by political correctness. He was not influenced by anything. He was influenced by truth. And he was a great defender of his father. He was really the heir to his father. Where would the Jewish world, where would the American Jewish world be without the Feinsteins? Without people who lived in simple apartments on the Lower East Side of New York, who did not have public persona, but who were recognized from the inside. I mentioned yesterday to Rabbi Goldwicht that every successful business requires a Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside. Requires someone who can sell the product and someone who can produce the product. And the Jewish people generally also require that. So in a general sense, we could say that Rabbi Sachs was Mr. Outside. He sold the product. But there would be no product to sell if it were not for Rabbi Feinstein. If it were not for Yeshiva Mitzvah Tiferes Yerushalayim. If it were not for the works of Halacha of the Igrot Moshe. If it were not for Art Scroll. You have to have something to sell. Part of the problem in the Jewish world is that we have great marketers that sell nothing. It's empty. It's a will-o'-the-wisp. It's here today, gone tomorrow. Rabbi Sachs was able to sell eternity. And Rabbi Feinstein was able to produce eternity. No human being is really essential to the continuity of the Jewish people. But no human being is replaceable either. What these two people brought, I don't know if we'll see it again. It's hard to see in our generation their like or their imitators. We have, thank God, talented people. We have great rabbis. We have scholars. But these are unique people. It's just a type of person that's not emulated. And that's what makes it so hard to say a hesped, because you can't wrap your hands around them. They're beyond whatever words you will say. Dovid HaMelech, when he came to eulogize Avner ben Ner, the great general and the head of the Sanhedrin at the time of Shaul HaMelech, so he said, Ish sar v'gadol nafal hayom b'Yisrael. So Ish sar, right? He was an officer, he was a lord, he was a Rosh Yeshiva, he was the head of the Sanhedrin. Good. What does v'gadol mean? So the Medrash says that gadol means she'osak b'dvorim gedolim. All of his life he was busy not with small things, not with pettiness, but with grand things, with superarching ideas, with plans to touch millions and to touch the Jewish future. That's a gadol. To see the whole picture, not just one's own narrow view. And that really was, in my opinion, the epitome of a hesped for both of these men. Rabbi Sachs did not see himself just as, and it's as, I don't mean to demean it, God forbid, but he didn't see himself as a rabbi in London. He saw himself as responsible for all of the Jewish people, for Klal Yisrael, for Israel and America and South America and South Africa. And Rabbi Feinstein also, he didn't see himself only his yeshiva. And if it's only his yeshiva, everybody else doesn't count. That was not him. He was like his father, who literally carried the Jewish people on the back of his shoulders and helped rebuild them in a very perilous and dangerous time. So as we mark the passing of these two great men, whether we knew them or not, that makes no difference, because they touched our lives anyway. Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Atem nitzovim hayom kulchem," all of you are here today, as asher yeshno po imono omed hayom, ves asher einenu po omed imono hayom. Those that are here and those that are not here. Those who knew them and those who didn't know them. Makes no difference. Because great people influence a world. They influence a generation. They make certain that the future will have the equipment and the weapons and the talents necessary for the survival and growth of Torah and the Jewish people and its eternity and its blessings. The Yehei Zichram Baruch. We will remember both of them in blessing and thanksgiving, even though it may be in pain and sorrow at the fact that they are no longer with us. But to a great extent, they will always be with us, because that is the eternity of Torah. If you would just hold on to Torah, it lives and lives and lives, and with it, so do all human beings. Thank you for listening.
Amen. Thank you very much, Rabbi Wein. We have a special schus and a special honor that we have with us, Rabbi Dr. Alan Kimchi. He was a Rav in the Ner Israel Synagogue in Hendon, in London, for over 35 years, and had a very, very close relationship with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. And he's seen firsthand what Rabbi Wein was just speaking about, how Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was with kings and princes, how he spoke to the whole world, how he taught the world that Judaism really has the ideas that shape humanity, ideas of ethics, of morality, of values. This was the language of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and it's a big kavod and a schus for us in our kehillah that we have with us Rabbi Alan Kimchi. I'm going to spotlight. And just 1 second, because we need to unmute as well. If the Rav could unmute, I think